This peak looks terrible, but worked insanely well, and this peak looks genius, but only if you're simple. In CS2, if you peek into someone, you have an advantage, but that depends on the way you do it and the situation in the round. So I'm going to show you how to peek perfectly and what peek to do when, so you can even out-aim a cheater. But first, a word from our sponsor. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor, Leadify. Leadify helps you track your CS performance, hopefully making you a better player. With Leadify, you can track your true performance with their rating system that focuses on impact rather than kill to death ratio, and you can compare that with your friends whenever you have a good game so you can laugh at them. You can also track your bragging rights with their automatic highlights that somehow still make me look like a noob. But however you want to track your improvement, you can check out Leadify for free at the link in the description. As a new player, most people think CS is about getting amazing aim, so they deathmatch for 4 hours and then wonder why they still die to this, which seems like amazing aim, except he didn't even move his crosshair, because good peeking is far more important for your time to kill than good aim, and time to kill is what actually matters. If you watch pro play, they might have 10 different peaks in one round, and even the way two pros do the same peak might be very different. You can see Zontix coming out of Palace methodically clears every angle, while JL coming out of the same position in this round primarily swings while holding his crosshair on the corner. But then in another round, JL peeks out very differently. There's no wrong way to clear a corner, except that or that. Okay, basically there's 5 main ways to clear an angle, but if you're below face at 7 and you just master the shoulder peek, you're gonna get a ridiculous amount of kills. Let me show you what I mean. I took a demo from a face at level 7, and I've placed bots in all of the places the AIM Mirage player played in a half of CS, and every single one of them is pretty much a free kill with a good peek. But that's not what they actually got hit with in the game. He got hit with this peek, and this peek, and that. It's easier said than done, but at lower levels, players really do just stand in spots you can easily clear. Look, the core fundamental behind peeking is to maximize your peeker's advantage. If you do that well and your opponent is rifling, you should kill them the vast majority of the time. And for a shoulder peek, all maximizing peeker's advantage means is get to max speed before the corner, stop before you actually react to the person, and counter strafe effectively. And be as far from the wall separating you as possible, but I'll get to that a bit later. But then there's this bit after the fight actually starts. Well, 80% of the time they should be dead before they even realize you're on their screen, but the other 20% of the time, it seems like people just crouch and stop moving entirely. If you can peek, burst, then not just turn into a turret, you're gonna win a ton of extra gunfights and rank up easily. But that's kind of off topic. If we go back to the beginning, why is it that some people clear angles while holding their crosshair on the corner, and some people hard clear angles while pre-aiming through the wall? Well, generally, you want to be clearing angles one by one. This is why someone entering out ramp on Mirage is kind of terrifying, because every angle is sequential. And it's a right eye peek too, right? No, stop. Most people just play one of 3 or 4 angles and hope the T doesn't clear them well. And, well, honestly, there's not too many other options. But at a spot like ladder, well, this is basically one huge off angle with infinite positions to play. So your options are swing with your crosshair on the right spot or jiggle. And jiggling is effective, but if you're clearing ladder with more than one player, it's a lot easier to just swing peek with your crosshair on the edge of the wall so you can create space behind you where your teammate can easily peek the trade if you die. Then again, if you're donk, you can just slide around like a maniac and get the kill yourself. If you've been watching closely, you might have actually noticed something a lot of these pros are doing. It's not quite a jiggle peek, but it's not really a full clear either. They're sort of semi-jiggling as they clear a bunch of different angles, and this is probably a little hard to do at beginner levels, but it's definitely worth noticing because almost every pro is doing it. In fact, the early versions of this meta inspired one of my favorite CS clips of all time.
Under the window, dog.
I'm sitting zoomed in. What is this? This kid's a fucking amazing savant. Dude, this guy's fucking pre-fired angles that don't exist. I'm zoomed in. I'm zoomed in at non-existent angles. You don't understand off angles.
The idea is it's almost always better to shoulder peek than to swing clear unless it's a sight hit. But when you're dealing with off angles, what angle are you shoulder peeking? Well, the jiggle clear answers that question. Yes. all of them. This has ridiculously even got to the point where players holding angles are doing the exact same thing, but in reverse, which sometimes goes terribly wrong, but usually works pretty well. What about this left eye peek thing? Okay, let me pause the video for a sec. The right eye advantage thing is possibly one of the most annoying narratives in CS history, because 99% of the time, if you're just further from the corner than your opponent, you're gonna have an advantage whether you're on the left or you're right. But technically, yes, your model leans left, and if you shift walk clear an angle from the left, you're gonna be at a disadvantage, which is only a slightly bigger disadvantage than just shift walk clearing an angle from either side. And this is where I see most mid-level players go wrong. A lot of the time they seem to know how to do the correct peaks, but not when. So early round, they just swing clear everything while running full speed, and late round, they just shift walk past every angle. Obviously, the key is to find a balance. Early round, the balance is between shoulder peeking and doing things fast enough to actually win the round. Because if everybody did this, you would pretty much be stuck in T-spawn all round. And this is also why I said you usually want to shoulder peek if it's not a sight hit. On a sight hit, if you shoulder peek everything, that beautiful pop flash your teammate definitely didn't horribly miss isn't going to last forever. But obviously this also means understanding timing outside of sight hits as well. And if you watch the pros, a lot of the time balance means stopping to clear the one or two most obvious off angles, but not taking all day to clear everything perfectly because, well, you can't even if you tried. Late round, the balance is between being silent and actually clearing things effectively. At lower levels, players tend to just shift walk into the angle and hope everything works out. But your options are to stay quiet or peek effectively, or to silent peek, which is where you let go of shift for half a step so you can get more speed than walking, but you still don't make noise. Aim ramp on Mirage is actually the best place to show this, because if you shift walk into the angle, you're probably just gonna die, especially because it's a left eye peek, but if you peek correctly, you can get the kill pretty often. That's not the only way to peek this angle, but it is one of the options, and it's not just a silent peek, it's like 4 different peeks in one. But other than a silent peek, I would call that a crouch peek, which in theory is just the fastest way to peek any angle and get the frag, because when you crouch, you almost instantly stop and are accurate. In fact, you don't even really need to counter straight. But for some reason, if you watch pros, even in pugs, they almost never crouch peek, because, well, you have to crouch is the problem. When you crouch, you full commit yourself to the gunfight, which means you are completely stationary, and if you don't get the kill, you're not going anywhere other than dead. So it's usually useful when silent peeking, especially in close range positions where you're already at a huge disadvantage, or if you're an opper and you're dead if you miss anyways, or if you're playing matchmaking at any elo above 15k. Cheaters. I mean, there's a lot of cheaters. And there are some angles where odds are you probably die, or at least you're at a huge disadvantage. And this is where a lot of the alternative styles of peeking come into play. A Xantarez peek out a ramp doesn't make a ton of sense because normal clears are pretty effective. Xantarez peeking at half wall on Inferno, also kind of crazy without a flash, but I can see the logic to deal with an opper corner. Now Xantarez peeking an opper arch, that makes a lot of sense, as long as you smoke lane. Of course, in general, the further you are from an angle, the less your opponent sees before you can see them. If I'm right up on the wall, a ton of me is visible before I even realize I'm on my opponent's screen. But it's also a matter of perspective. If you're holding an angle as a CT, you probably want to be as close to cover as possible so you can fall back quickly. And that often means not holding it all that wide, so it's possible to overswing the angle your opponent is holding, which gives you a free kill when they peek back into you. The idea being that depending on who peeks into who, the obstacle between you is not the same. So if you force someone to unpeek, well, now you have the advantage. In theory. That is, unless he was holding wide enough, in which case you're dead. Or maybe not, because this style of peek also throws off crosshair placement in general and often gives you time to get a quick shot off. Alternatively, you could try jiggling from close to the wall to either force a shot or bait them into bringing their crosshair closer to the corner, and then you over peek that pre-aim. The only downside is these all fully commit you and give you a decent chance of just dying. But that was the point. You were late round with no utility, so you took a risk. Or it was early round and you had full utility and you just wanted to grief your teammates. This is what makes a video on peeking pretty challenging, because there are 500 ways to peek and each one is entirely situational. But if you take one thing away from this video, it should be to look at your mechanics as a package and sort of like a pyramid, where movement, or usually usually peeking is the bottom level. Before your aim even really matters that much, you need to peek things effectively, and at a low level, if you just have really good peeks, you can absolutely farm people who are just standing still in obvious pre-aim spots. Then on top of that, you want to stay mobile after peeking so you're not an easy target, and then on top of that is your aim. And somewhere in there, game sense matters also. But really, until your peeking is good, your aim will always look terrible. Anyways, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one YouTube thinks you'll like.